I think we've clearly seen a direction over the last 10 years actually towards recycling started it, and then circular economy added to those pressures, and I think now the legislators and policymakers have got involved, and we now have plastic taxes and so forth, and there's been a real focus I think over the last probably 5 years or so on really what is seen to be a problem and not actually a solution. So it's caused extreme stress I think in that environment.
Yeah, and that perception is pretty widespread. Consumers want change. They've seen the programs on TV, they've seen the impact that plastic can have if it's misused, and they've put pressure on the brands, their favourite brands and their favourite retailers to do something different. So plastic use is clearly under pressure. I think that's pretty understood by everyone. So people are looking for alternatives to use it in the best way or in combinations with other materials in the best way. So I think there's a big drive to more sustainable materials that are circular, that can be reused and recycled. So what's key to that is that they can actually be recycled, that you can separate and collect at end of life. And a lot of materials that are out there now used in packaging are combinations of different polymers or combinations of papers and polymers. So it's how do you disassemble those combinations at end of life in order to make them circular. So paper is an obvious route, which we've seen growth, and there's great opportunity for the paper market in combination with the right materials to give the functionality needed to meet the needs of consumers. That's what I see.
Yeah, I think you've seen it. I think it's really interesting that you've kind of had an early start at the beginning of the 2000s where the drive towards recyclability, etc. And all the way the message to the consumer, and you've seen messages on packs, recyclable or not currently recyclable, etc. And I think what has become revealed is that the fact that hardly any of this stuff was being recycled at all. It was counted as recycled, but not actually recycled. So presses like Hugh Fearnley, Whitty Stall, and programs like that. There's just been this steady awakening of the fact that we need to be more material smart. And whilst there are alternatives like bioplastics coming to the fore, etc., those are at such low scale at the moment. What do you do? And the obvious driver is, if you want to drive towards a more sustainable resource, you drive towards paper. But if you're doing that, you need help with that paper solution to give you the properties that everybody expects out of their packaging. And that's the flip, actually. So that immediately takes you away, in a lot of cases, from conventional materials. Yeah, I think they've obviously decided to try and give some real definition, because as I just said, recycling has suddenly become almost a meaningless term. There is all sorts of weird descriptions on packages as to whether that's recyclable, collectible, sorted or separated or whatever it is. And I think they've finally decided to say, no, we actually need to give real definition here as to what recyclable really means, and that it's genuinely recycled. So there is a route to a genuine recycling, scenario. I think so. I think they're battling through. Some are obviously easier than others. So rigid containers like PET, for example, soft drinks containers, very successfully recycled, easily identified. As you get, as Mark said, as you get to the more complicated, constructions, that gets a bit more challenging.
Yeah, current recycled label is disingenuous at best, and depending on where you live and your knowledge of materials and how they're constructed, even though those of us that work in the packaging industry are confused. So, and we're all consumers, and we understand the confusion that the current labelling causes. So finding a way of clarifying that, but actually still making sure that you're constructing products in the best way from the best materials that is then reflected in that they can actually be recycled. It's important we find a way that the labelling scheme actually does that and helps consumers.
Well, the danger is in all these things is that you default back to your comfort zone, which is the common materials. So, and exclude anything innovative out of that actually will take you to where you actually want to go, which is circular economy, sustainable routes to material transformation and packaging transformation. So that's the danger, is that you default back to, oh well, let's just concentrate on polyethylene, polypropylene, PET, the big volume plastic systems in the market. But actually, if you do that, that's a real dangerous place to be, because if you've got brands and retailers directing their traffic, if you like, away from those materials generally towards paper, for example, you've got to bring in something else to give you the sustainability and circular economy story as well as the functionality. So don't shut out the new stuff, basically.
Yeah, functionality is crucial, because over decades, packaging industry's created some fantastic products which keep products safe, keep it obviously alive, increase shelf life, make sure it doesn't get damaged or broken. So all those aspects of functionality need to be maintained, but as John says, you need to be looking at other ways of making that product at the end of life available to be recycled. And there are new materials out there which can do that and can allow for that separation and recycling at end of life whilst maintaining that functionality, because you do need to maintain the functionality.
Clearly, we're using a material which is readily available. We've just done something quite clever with it in terms of making it widely processable and therefore open to many of these applications in the packaging area. But the backup to that is that any circular economy material, whether it's an old one or a new one, has not only to answer the front end functionality question and the processability question, they've got to answer the end of life question. So we've done all of those three things, and as we've moved forward over the last sort of 4 or 5 years or so in developing this material. So we've done a huge amount of work with independent test parties and independent universities, etc., looking at this material in almost every aspect, from biodegradation to recyclability, both chemical and mechanical, how you identify this in a waste stream, how it can be separated. So there's a lot of work here. You've got to do it.
Yeah, as John said, over the last few years, we actually sort of started from the back end in terms of the end of life route of how would this combination of hydropulp with papers behave in standard repulping. So without having to change the infrastructure that exists, and the paper industry's got a huge advantage here. It's got a well-established infrastructure and route to recycling that almost everyone understands. What paper looks like and where to put it in terms of going back into recycling. And that we wanted to make sure that Hydropol in combination with paper didn't cause any issues through that recycling chain, through the repulping process, the standard one, with no modifications. And that's been a lot of painstaking research of doing those trials, doing that work with independent test houses and established paper mills to actually prove that. And so we set about to do that, got to a point where we're clear that is exactly what happens, and therefore it is a material which is going to separate off and allow for the full recovery of the fibre in the recycling process.
Yeah, I think, look, I mean, if your drive is toward, as part of industrial strategy, etc., is a circular economy, which it clearly is, they're defined by that in different policy mechanisms across different departments, all the way through ultimately to what we're claiming at COP26 on carbon, etc. That's your driver: low carbon, sustainability, circular economy. Then you have to break this down in easy sections. And if you look at packaging as a problem, plastic as a problem, then there are solutions out there like ours which aid that circular economy solution, all the way from the message from brand, retailer, converter, all the way through to the waste industry and actually the consumer, because it's an obvious place to start. This is a win-win actually from that point of view.
Yeah.
So,
Mine would be very simply in the same message John's is incentivise that collaboration between all the parts of the supply chain, because the solutions exist, they're there. And if you combine the right materials, you can get the right end of life, but it does require the collaboration of all the industry players, and the government's in a position where they can incentivise that and support that.